Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session
with your host, Michael Rearden.
Welcome, Shira Abel, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Michael?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, we're just going to be talking about your work. We're definitely going to be diving into the perception formula, so more of that to come. But if you could, can you please tell the world, the audience, who you are, what you do, and how you help?
I come from over 20 years of sales, marketing, and go-to-market for companies that are both tiny, like startups, all the way to enterprises. I've worked with Siemens, UL, a whole bunch of different companies in there, and it runs the gamut. How do I help? I do speaking and workshops on a multitude of issues, but mainly I talk about, perception and behavioral science and how you could use behavioral science in order to get better outcomes. And that's why I created the perception formula.
What is the definition of perception to you?
Perception, it's like brand. It's not owned by you. It's owned by the people who think of you. And do you want me to go into the perception formula yet?
It's up to you. I mean, you and I are just having a conversation. When we hit record, we don't know what we're going to get. We might get something good. We might get something great, something fabulous. And it's just a free-flowing conversation. So wherever you feel like we will go, I'm also going to go with you.
Okay. So I'm going to dive in. The perception formula is all about how others view you. Perception is, how do people think of you? Do they think of you? Are you being thought of by your target or the person that you're interested in thinking of you? However, whatever the situation may be, are you getting what you want from your team? Are you motivating them the right way? It could be an HR situation. It could be, I had a call this morning where I worked through, it was for a podcast I'm going to be on later, but I got into a personal conversation with the woman and we talked about her and her ex-husband. So we put all the stats into the perception formula, into the LLM, and got a recipe for her, a perception recipe. It's basically a set of directions that is advice on how to manage the situation with him, like how to put things in place, how to maybe create barriers and buffers so that she can get what she's looking for from him, because it's a challenging situation. They have a child together. So it was built for business. It was built because I come from sales and marketing, and, sales it starts emotional. People decide that they like you, and then they justify through the numbers and everything else why they're going to buy from you. But as humans making a decision, I need to feel comfortable. I need to have a level of trust. I need to know you're going to deliver on what you're promising. And that's emotional. So perception is, are you going to deliver on the promise that I need from you? And at the same time, if I'm not thinking of you at all, then how are you going to get what you're looking for? How are you going to close that deal? The perception formula is, perception is a function of, I do it as a math, I started as math and then I'll explain it the other way. A function of heuristics, which are mental shortcuts. Hormones. Now, because I'm a practitioner, these are only the hormones that can be triggered. This is not a purely scientific formula. This is meant for people getting things done. So hormones like cortisol, dopamine, this type of thing. History, the history you have with someone or they have with you or your brand or the two companies together, whatever the situation may be. And heritage, where do you come from? What's your cultural background? How do you think as opposed to how the person you're working with thinks, right? East Coast versus West Coast. Somebody from Boston is not going to treat you the same way as somebody from Southern California. They're two very different attitudes. They're two very different ways of speaking, especially if you're from like the middle of proper Boston, right? Where every other word might be an F-bomb. So, it's very, very different. And we're not going to understand everyone from the get-go. We tend to think of things, well, since I look at it like this must be what's happening there. That's not how anything actually works. Heritage is how you target. Now, back to it in a non-mathematical sense. History, heuristics, and hormones are a three-legged stool. If you're missing any of them, there's no perception. Nobody's thinking of you. So, heuristics, Is there any type of mental shortcut tied to you or your brand? Hormones. Is there any emotion tied to your brand? History. Do you have any experience together at all? If you don't, they're obviously not thinking of you because they don't know you exist. So if any of those are missing, you are not being considered. You're not even in the race or the run. And again, heritage, after those three are taken care of, heritage is how you target. It's how you message. It's the word you use. It's how you segment, right? Because not everybody's the same. So while there are similar things between groups, you still need to group them. You're not going to, let's put it into a business sense of, you're not going to message marketers the same way you message mechanical engineers. You're certainly not going to message developers the way you would message a marketer. They don't like marketers. I mean, we're talking about generalities here, but it's a pretty good generality, right? So you have to look at the group that you're talking to and give them the language that will give them the emotional trigger and the mental shortcut and build a history. And with that, I work with the individual or the team or the executive to create a prompt that goes into an LLM that gives a perception recipe. And that recipe will also describe, here are their heuristics that we assume they will have. And then you can read it and you see how accurate it is. It's an LLM. It's never going to be perfect. But the fact of the matter is, most people are not sitting there reading Daniel Kahneman and Tversky and Kaldani and Taylor and all of the others who were the ones who created behavioral economics, which a lot of this stuff is based on. Most people don't read the psychology that goes behind all of this. And so if you're not reading psychology and you're not reading behavioral economics, how are you going to take advantage of this information? Well, you put it into an LLM and you need to be able to discern, okay, this works, this doesn't, this makes sense to me, this does not, and work with the LLM and tweak it. But it's usually pretty close in the first try. And then you take it from there until you get to something that you're like, yeah, this is awesome. And then you actually have to implement it and follow the directions, because otherwise nothing will change. If you don't end up changing your own behaviors, nobody is going to change how they view you. So it's a matter of, I see perception as how others view us, like our own personal brand, but we have a responsibility to influence that.
I like that idea of perception. It's very different than the common idea of perception. It's how I view a situation more so than myself as a brand or someone as a brand. It's a very unique way to talk about it. And I'm going to definitely dive in this, idea of the perception formula with you. We talked about behavior formulas. If someone could understand their behavior, could they change their life?
Absolutely. Okay, so I had another podcast last week where she was single and didn't want to be anymore. She'd raised her kids. She was empty nester. She had just turned 60. She'd been alone for 2 decades, basically. And she wanted to find somebody. She wanted to find a life partner. So we put all of her information into an LLM during the podcast and got a perception recipe of what she needs to look at in herself and how she is managing things and what she's doing. And it gave her a list of suggestions on how she could do things differently. She loved it. She was like, this is amazing. Yes, you can absolutely change yourself. I mean, that is a lot of it, right? If we're giving a negative perception, if one piece of that formula is negative, then you have to work on the perception. In this case, it is not a pure mathematical formula, as 2 negatives do not equal a positive. 2 negatives equal a worse negative that you need to get over. So yes, it could be that you need to work on yourself, but all of us need to work on ourselves. I mean, I think that's kind of a given. We should be doing that anyhow.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, learning is a forever process, and then growing in, it's there's a saying, progress, not perfection.
Yes.
We're always just making progress.
Yes.
And, like going to some of those examples you gave, like the woman who wanted to be in a relationship after her kids raised or, grown up and everything. What were her behaviors stopping that? Was it more of a mindset, or was it like things that she was doing? Like, I'm busy with my career and my podcast and I don't have time for this. So she was doing things that weren't I guess you can say, pertinent to get in a relationship, like maybe being on dating sites or going out and meeting people or asking friends if they know anyone. I think it's important for us to understand the behaviors that sometimes we do unintentionally or we do it just subconsciously. It's just like we just do it. It becomes our, maybe a habit. So we do things that might not be conducive to the life that we want. And then we wonder why we're not getting the results that we would like. So there are many things that need to change, and behaviors is definitely going to be one of them. But changing yourself is extremely difficult. I'm not sure if anyone has tried to change, and if you have, welcome to the podcast, because this podcast is for change, and it is daunting sometimes to say, "Whoa, I have to do all of these things," and it's like a Zen saying. It's like you have to empty your cup, so you can fill it up with something new. The saying goes a little bit deeper. If your cup is full right now, you have to empty it. The tea is cold. So your life feels cold. So you need it to be empty so you can fill it up with what you want, with something hot, with something warm, with
I like
something that
that.
lights you up, your passion, all of these wonderful things that we want. But we are afraid to relinquish our identity or the past that we have created for ourselves.
So it says she needs to reassess her expectations. A lot of this is common sense, but a lot of the time we are so wrapped up in our day to day that we don't take the time to deep think about these things. So reassess expectation, practice openness, embrace physical changes. She's 60 now, so things change. Prioritize self-care, continue therapy. She mentioned that she was in therapy on the podcast and everything. Reframe past experiences, because we can get in our heads that one thing is a certain way and then we react to that thing rather than reframing it so that we could get past it. Embrace cultural strengths. And challenge limiting beliefs, right? We get things in our head that are, I had asked a limiting belief versus self-aware. A limiting belief is saying, I can't. And self-aware is more along the lines of, I don't like, right? So getting past saying to yourself, I can't do this, because that's a limiting belief, rather than being self-aware. And then expand social journal. And then, the action plan was expand social circle, because we get things through our loose connections, not our deep connections. They would have already done something if they could have at this point, right? So you need to have a lot of loose connections for opportunities. Try online dating, practice self-reflection, be proactive, focus on shared interests, cultivate independence, practice effective communication, stay positive, be patient, seek support. Is this going to change the world? I don't know. But if she does these things, she will be more likely to find somebody.
Yeah. The idea of changing the world is very personal too, because sometimes it's not about changing the world as a whole, but changing your world. Because if you can just, maybe find someone, like I was watching, it was another podcast, and they talked about a partner, like a lifelong partner.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, they said your friends are going to leave. Family is going to come and go. Your mom's going to die. Your dad's going to die. It's very negative, it seemed like, right? But then he talked about their spouse, their partner that they were going to spend their rest of their life with. And they said, that person's going to be with you until the end of time, your time, right? And I said, that's powerful, because, we all are vying for happiness to some degree, some level, right? It's the basic necessity of being human. It's like we want to be happy to some degree. We have our basic needs met today, most of us. We have shelter, we have safety, water and food typically.
Maslow's needs.
Clothing. And so we can focus on the happiness aspect. Like, let's be happy. Let's retire early. Let's do all of these things. And it brings about a different idea to the mind now. Because if we look at baby boomers, for example, just as one of the generations to look at, they would never think about retiring early. Like, I'm going to retire when I'm 30. No, never. But the generation that's coming, 30, yes, let's retire early. They want to be digital nomads, things along these lines. And then the work ethic compared to the generation of baby boomers versus today is very different. Not saying it's wrong or anything, but it's just very different. Because we do live in a technical, logical age where you can work remote, you can work from home, you can do things a lot quicker. Machinery, technology, everything has changed and adjusted. So for them, they look at the generation coming up as like, oh man, they're so lazy, but they are more efficient, essentially. because they can do things a lot quicker. They can do a lot more. They have, a device, a phone that has more more technology than the first space launch to into space. So we have this device, we have all of these wonderful things, but we have the mindset of past, and we have the past or the mindset of the present. How does perception play a role, or the perception formula play a role to someone who's older versus someone who's newer in the world?
So, well, I mean, the information that you put in determines what you end up getting out and what the issue is that you're looking to solve, right? Actually, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
36.
And do you have an issue that you would like to work through in the perception formula?
I don't think I have any issues.
That's nice.
I'm trying to think. Do I have an issue? I mean, my life is so simple. The only thing I'm looking at is my parents getting older. That's it.
Yeah, that's not really where a solution that's not a perception. That's not a perception issue.
Yeah, it's a life thing.
And that's just life. So then, all right, let me put it like this. Actually, no, you have Reven concepts.
Yes,
You're
okay.
selling.
We can talk about that.
Let's talk about that. You have Reven concepts, you're selling. Who are you selling to?
I sell to primarily individuals. I work with a lot of teens and I work with young adults. So the target is parents, essentially, to work with their budding young minds.
And what's the benefit of working with you?
The benefit of working with me is during school. I don't know if you have, well, you have because you taught at Berkeley. Teachers, especially in the elementary age, they mean well, but sometimes they get burned out. And sometimes those negativities can rub off on the child. So they learn limits. They learn that they can only go so far. Some teachers will even say dastardly things like, you never amount to anything. You'll be a garbage man before you know it, or something like that. So they have these negative biases. And one of the things I wanted to do with the company is to help these teens and these young adults who are going into the real world start to shed these limiting beliefs that they were given, whether from their parents, their teachers, or their peers in general.
Okay, let's see what comes out from this. Teachers in elementary school get burned out. The kids learn limits. Some teachers say terrible things. Reven Concepts does is work with teenagers and help them shed limiting beliefs from the world around them. And it is not, did I use the wrong one? Hold on a second. It is not giving me the actual, I created a space this morning for perception recipes, and did not actually, okay, so I use Perplexity for this. And I created a space this morning, which is like a project in Claude or the equivalent in ChatGPT, and it did not actually follow the directions. So,
well, the idea, and you and I can just talk generally. We don't need technology to kind of get in the way of a good conversation. Sometimes we can just look at it from our own perspective.
It's doing it now. I'm sorry to interrupt. All right. Recognize heuristics. Recognize the impact of teacher behavior on student self-perception. You already do that. Identify patterns of negative messaging in organizational settings, because you need to be educating both sides, right? In a situation where a child has low self-esteem because they've been beaten down from, say, a parent saying something they shouldn't have, or a teacher saying something they shouldn't have, you have to work on both sides and identify patterns. Hormones. Address the stress response in both teachers and students, which is also another thing. Anybody who's being emotionally abused in any right will have an elevated cortisol being the stress hormone. That stress hormone, cortisol, is only cut off through endorphins. And endorphins can be triggered through music that you love, laughter, and exercise. So one brain hack that I do when I'm giving a talk or whatever, if it's like right after lunch and everybody feels like I have everybody raise their arm for over 2 minutes, and I set a timer and I explain why. Because when you raise your arms, this is an isotonic exercise. And when you feel the burn in your arms after doing it for so long, when you bring your arms down, you feel endorphins. So if you're stressed before that, if you had a really bad morning, or you had a fight with somebody you care about, or somebody wasn't nice or whatever, and you have something important coming up, you could raise your arms for 2 minutes, or if you're in really good shape, like at this point, I need to do it for 3 minutes because I've been doing this for a while and I need to feel the burn, right? And I don't after 2. So once you do that, it cuts off the cortisol. So you're thinking clear and you're making better decisions. You don't make good decisions when you're stressed. And you can go into your meeting or on stage or anything else feeling excited and happy rather than stressed. So that's a hormone. And consider the emotional impact of burnout on classroom dynamics. History, you need to acknowledge the past negative experiences and recognize the cumulative effect of limiting beliefs over time, because limiting beliefs, they compound in a bad way. It's not the kind of compound we like, right? It's not savings compounding or this type of thing. It's a negative compounding, and we need to take care of that. And then consider the cultural and socioeconomic factors influencing teacher-student interactions, and acknowledge diverse backgrounds and their impact on perception. So it's also giving an explanation and implementation, which is raise awareness, implement stress-reducing techniques, create positive reinforcement systems, provide cultural competency training, offer targeted support for students, encourage self-reflection, develop trauma-informed practices.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's very helpful to get a breakdown of that, because I don't think many people, when they look at a problem, they look at for like in all the different aspects of that. Like, my husband doesn't love me anymore. Well, why does your husband not love you anymore? I'm sure there's many things if we start to break it down. And I know like therapists do a good job at this, counselors, like they try to get to the root. Would you say that the perception looks at the root rather than the surface of what is going on?
It can only look as deep as the information it's given.
Hmm.
It is, at the end of the day, it's an LLM. It's an AI system. It's a large language model. And the way large language models work is that it takes the information given and then gives an answer based on what it feels the most likely next word would be. If that makes sense. That is essentially how it works. So that's why, it's only as good as the information you give it. The more information you give it, the more accurate it can give a response. So it could be surface or it could go deep.
What would be the questions to get to the deep part, right? So if we wanted to look, we could look at any situation. It could be mine. It could be one of the podcast hosts or that you mentioned before.
So my recommendation in that case, I would actually ask the LLM system to ask me a series of questions in order to create the correct prompt to get me the goal that I'm looking for, which is like, say, a perception recipe or perception formula recipe that explains what I need to do for this, explain the recommendations, right? So you could go, okay, this makes sense, this doesn't, because again, people aren't out reading Kahneman or any of the things behind it, so they're not going to be experts in this. So they need to understand why was this recommendation given and get the information behind it. So it's a process.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because technology has come so far from where it was, and I think about the human aspect to this now, because I know like Elon Musk is like creating machineries and stuff like that that can be AI, and you don't have to like the guy. You don't have to like the guy or anything, but he's trying. He's making these machines to do all these wonderful things, like create cars and stuff, and maybe to even work in houses and stuff, and probably to go to Mars. Who knows, right? He's doing a lot of things with machines, and I'm sure there's someone out there trying to give a machine an emotion. And they have machinery out there that will have facial features and stuff like that. There's dentists that use certain machineries when they're working on, and they'll trigger a pain thing if pain happens. And all of these things are programmed. Can technology truly understand the human emotion, even if it's only a program?
I don't know if can it understand the emotion is the question. Can it respond to the emotion properly, I guess, because it's understand. What does a computer understand? A computer is programmed. Is that understanding? That depends on your definition of it, right? So I would say, can it be programmed to respond properly to various emotions and responses and triggers of people? In that, I would say absolutely. And I would actually, considering how many, I like TikTok. It's about to go away, which makes me sad, but I really like it.
I didn't even know it was going away. It's going away.
It's getting banned by the Supreme Court on the 19th. There's some rumors that it might not get banned, but who knows? So, but anyway.
Do you want to know a fun fact about TikTok?
Sure.
TikTok in America is very different than TikTok in China.
I believe that. Oh, yeah,
TikTok
I'm sure.
TikTok in China is all about education.
I use it for education, though.
Yeah, but most people in America use it for entertainment.
Fair. But I've learned so much from it. And one of the
Of
things I've
course,
learned,
it's different tools. Like you can use
yeah,
Google for information. People or YouTube, same thing. My podcast is on YouTube. You can listen to this, or you can watch, someone blow up a balloon and pop it and laugh. People get to choose to be entertained or to be educated, and it's very different how they have it here in America. How like the algorithm is for promoting, hey, be entertained so you can scroll through and be happy for endless minutes and hours. But in China, it's all about education. It's very interesting. Fun fact: the podcast is top 50 in Japan. I don't even know how they even understand English in Japan. I guess there's a good amount of English speakers in Japan, or maybe they read the subtitles or something. I don't know how they do it, but I was like shocked when I looked at that. I was like, how does this even happen? But over there, again, education is one of those things that they drive, and it's so interesting because our children today, we can go back just generation. I think it's generation Gen X,
that's
when
me.
they were starting to get cell phones in schools. And I remember there was a whole push, even when I was a teacher. This is 2013.
That's not Gen X. You're talking about millennials. Or it would
Millennials?
be Gen Z.
Okay, then yeah.
I'm
So
Gen X, sweetheart.
yeah,
You had
Gen
cell
Z
phones, but
then.
they
It
were
was it,
brick.
it was Gen Z then. Gen Z, I believe. It was 2000 like 30. So
Oh,
Gen
yeah,
Z.
that's Gen Z.
Okay, yeah. So they were talking about letting kids have their phones in school so they can use them as calculators, as computers, because it was a cheaper alternative than getting everyone a laptop. And either way, the students didn't take care of the laptops because we had whole cases of laptops, and the kids would throw them and break them and spill stuff on them, and it was very costly, I'm sure, for the district. So one of the things that they were thinking about was saying, hey, you have a phone, let's use it for educational purpose. But that kind of, went downhill because people weren't going to use their phones for educational reasons, right? I used my phone for fun and YouTube and stuff like that and texting. And sure enough, that's what happened. And so they had to get the laptops anyway. But, like the way it was when we were growing up, Gen X now, right? We didn't have those things. You didn't have the things. But now they do. They have this idea or this resource that they can utilize. And it's very similar to the question I asked about, the idea of like baby boomers and like hard workers versus modern day people. Like the perception of learning is very different. If we look at it in your way, I don't think it would be, but if we look at perception in the way of how someone views learning today, it's different. Because before we did math like the long way. I don't know if you remember like doing it the long
Yes.
way. You had to like
They do it totally different now.
They separate them. Tens,
I
hundreds,
can't do it the way
thousands.
my son does it.
I
I
can
can't.
I can do it. It just doesn't make sense to me, but it makes sense to them. It's
Yeah,
so
no.
weird.
Funny, my son, my youngest, is a math kid. He's now studying. Well, he's studying integrated business and engineering over at Lehigh. So he's like a math kid, and he's. It's very. I remember when he was going through all these classes, and my husband had to help him. My husband's an engineer. I went up to calculus, but it doesn't seem to have any effect. I can't do what I used to, and the way they do math today boggles my mind.
So if we just took how the difference in how we learn math, right? That brand essentially is how we view someone from doing what we did versus they have done. And it's not that they're wrong or we're right, but it puts us in a different light. Like I'm viewing you as doing math this way versus I did math this way. And it could be in the times of I had to do this much labor when I was younger, or I had to walk this far. So
Walk 10 miles uphill both ways.
in the snow, but today is very different. And I believe, like going just to the brand of what perception is, you know, your history, I think, plays a big part. And many people don't want someone who has like a pristine set of armor. It's a saying. I want the person, to be my warrior in my
Who's
army
been
who
through
has,
battle?
battered armor, rather than this knight in shining armor with a brand new sword. They never went to battle, brand new armor. They want the person who's bruised and battered. That's the history aspect to that. Would you say, looking at someone who has been there and done it has more say than someone who's coming up and doing it different?
It depends on what it is. Like everything, I will listen to both, and then I make the okay, there's a whole bunch of things that my son has not done, right? I'll still ask him his opinion on things, but then I see where he's got the gaps because he's very young. Okay, he's young, he's a freshman. So with those gaps, okay, I'll take some of his advice and then I'll ignore other bits of it. My husband is an engineer. I will take some of his advice, but he's an engineer. He has no history in marketing. I'll take some of his advice and ignore other bits of it. I think that, I'll take the bits that I feel are relevant from whoever it is that I'm speaking to. Somebody else I know recommended a book. They said how amazing it was. They kept going on and on and on. It's a marketing book. I'm a marketer. I love marketing books. So I listened to the book. No. I couldn't even listen for 10 minutes. It was horrible. Not only was the voice of the author dull and droning, but the information was, for me, basic. So you have to look at the person on the other side and respectfully figure out, what do they know? Because it's not about age. It's about experience. If I want to know how to talk to freshmen in college, I have an expert at home. If I want to talk to engineers, I have an expert at home. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's about, what is my goal for this? And you have to use it accordingly. That's everything, though, right?
Yeah, no, and it's funny because I like how you put it, right? If you need help from a freshman, you ask a freshman. If you need help from an engineer, you ask an engineer. But today, they go to Google, they go to Reddit, they go to the chat room, and they ask someone who has no say, a streamer on YouTube or on Twitch. Like they'll go like with their life problems, and this person's not a therapist or a counselor or anything,
Yeah.
but they have developed that bond, and like just looking at the connection aspect. Like I feel connected to this person to some degree. I like the person, right? They might enjoy their content, and so they feel a need to be swayed by the words. Okay, so I'm going to listen to this person, even if the advice might be terrible advice. Like I've seen terrible advice, and the person say, that makes sense because they had faith in the person, versus someone who, could say, if I need assistance, let me ask a person who assists people with that. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go to, see a lawyer if I want to get my home built. Yeah, they might help me with the paperwork for buying the land.
Contract.
But they're not going to build,
No, they're not going to design. They're not going to build. They're not engineers, right? You got to go for the expertise where the expertise is. Yeah.
And how would someone be able to identify the expertise of an individual before stepping in? Because a degree is a great thing to have, but it might not mean much if someone really didn't, what's the word I want to say, enthuse themselves into that. So if you're, for example, your husband being an engineer, he might hate being an engineer and barely made it. I'm not saying that is him, but it could be. And so, but for you to be able to say he's an expert, I would ask him. It seems like he would be a knowledgeable person to ask. But then again, there's people who just kind of try to cut corners. Like, okay, you can do this for me? All right, sure thing. So how would someone identify if someone is that person for the job?
If somebody is promising you things that seem too good to be true, things that seem too good to be true are often too good to be true. I grew my marketing agency to seven figures. And in order to do that, I always told the truth. People wanted, can you guarantee me these results? No, nobody can. And if they can, they're doing something very fishy on the other end of it, and you're going to end up paying for that. you have to, if they're promising you something too good to be true, if they're saying you're going to make X amount of money and blah, blah, blah in 30 days with all of this, and you only got to have to do 4 hours worth of work and follow me and pay me $10,000 in order to get everything you've ever wanted in life, it's all hoo-ha.
Should we talk to Tim Ferriss about the 4-hour work week then?
So have you read that book?
Yeah, I did.
In the beginning, he talks about how he's working 70, 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
And he did it for years. He did it for years. And then once he grew the company to a certain size, he was able to put somebody else in place.
Mm-hmm.
Tons of people have done that. They're all in Entrepreneurs Organization, EO. That's not okay. That's how you do it. He worked like a dog for years to be able to work 4 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
That's not that there's okay. There's nothing revolutionary there. There's nothing. What he has there is a book that I like Tim Ferriss. I've met him several times. I've spoken at conferences he's spoken at. Okay, so just putting that in place there. The reason why the title is as it is that he A/B tested it with ads and it performed better. That's it. So the promise is at the end of the book, but it's basically work really hard for years, put all the systems in place, and then you can do things so that you're putting in less time. I mean, he was able to turn it into a bestseller because everybody wants to work 4 hours a week, but the advice in there is just your basic advice. He won an award for dancing because he was able to figure out the rules and just play towards those rules. Everything he does is about how he can game the system. He gamed the system for selling the book. He gamed the system for the dance contest. He gamed the system for, this is what he does. He works to game the system. And he encourages others to game the system. But in reality, the man works. He puts in probably more hours than anybody. He's done so many different self-tests and all of these other things. Like he's definitely not just doing 4 hours a week.
Yeah. I think it's the dream that is enticing to people where they say, this would be nice. Going back to some of the examples retiring early that like, what would you do? Like, I'm only 36, but like, why would I retire in my 30s? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And I know just from working with the elderly too, when they're all said and done, like how fast they decline when they have no purpose or why anymore.
Oh yeah,
like,
no, you've got to have other things in your life. Like there is a when it goes up. So divorce goes up after retirement for men because they have no purpose. They start driving their partner, their spouse nuts, and they've got nothing to do and they're underfoot and it's just not fun for anybody. And I've read so many different articles on this, part of the research shows that you need to have a purpose when you retire. So I have already planned out my husband's retirement.
I'm sure he loves
cars. He loves cars. He's an engineer. He's got this little BMW that he's fixing up. He will do that full time once he retires. He will fix up and sell cars. He'll buy beaters and make them into something beautiful. This is what his projects are going to be, because that's what he enjoys. So that will keep his mind going. So his mind will stay good, because you have to worry about dementia. You have to worry about deterioration. When your mind isn't active, you deteriorate. Women don't have this as much of an issue because women become more active in the community, right? Women start taking classes and they start volunteering and they start doing all of these other things. I have an uncle who was a nurse before he retired, and he volunteers in the community, like crazy volunteers. The guy's busy all the time. This type of thing. You have to keep yourself active or else you deteriorate, just like you said. You have to have a plan or else everything falls apart.
When someone retires and they choose to do a hobby or a passion or something different, would their brand prior be different than what it is today? So your husband being an engineer, that brand would be put to yesterday and now he's a mechanic? Or how would you view that in the terms of your brand or how others see you as a brand?
So in that case, I would say he's an engineer with a personal hobby. because it's going to be very niche. He's only going to work on the cars with like special kind of engines and stuff like this. I don't know. I know that the car that he has now, his BMW, is like something special that they talk about on chat rooms and has all these different components, and like it's a special engine. And I'm a marketer. I do sales. I don't know. If I were to sell the car, I could tell you all the details. But since that's not what I'm doing, he's got, but he knows all the different things. This is funny. When he bought the car, he checked the engine. He did all of his research. He found out the things that need to be replaced on the car and where they already replaced and all of this. He brings it home, and all I see are the marks in the paint and how it needs to get a really good polish and maybe be repainted. And I'm like, you bought this, but it looks like this. And he's like, what are you talking about? The engine is perfect. Engineer, marketer.
Yeah, very true. It's like personality versus the outside appearance of makeup or something. It's very different, and I believe perception has so many levels to it. And I know, our conversation today was, we definitely got to the perception formula, but it's definitely something for people to look more into, because I think it creates such wonderful insight for what they need to do if they feel stuck, overwhelmed, if they're looking to change some level of their circumstance. It's important to understand, who you are as a person. And, one of the last things I would love for you to do is to give us some final words that people can take away from this episode that that would help them with the idea of, the perception formula a bit more. And then please tell the audience where they can find you.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Shira Abel, ShiraAbel. You can find me on my website, shiraabel.com. I'm also on Instagram and I'm on YouTube. I'm also on TikTok, but that's going away. And in terms of how you would think about perception, well, you think about it in terms of your messaging. In a business perspective, you think about it in terms of your messaging. If you're doing account-based marketing, you think about it in terms of building relationships. If you're in HR, it's how you're building the team and the team dynamics. Also, if you're doing relationship marketing, then it's again in your messaging and also the actions that you do. What type of experiential marketing are you doing in order to build, again, the relationship? If you are in customer success, it's in your segmentation of how you are breaking down who you're messaging and how you're messaging them. This could also be part of your segmentation in the marketing department, depending on what part of marketing you're in. If you're an executive leader, then it could be in how you're messaging to the rest of your organization or your board or the rest of your team. And again, also team dynamics. So it's a human formula. It's meant to be used for the situations you have, to be able to build the dynamic, to be able to get you what you want and influence your own perception or how you are perceived.
Make it easy for everyone. All the links are going to be right down below, including the TikTok. If it's still there, they can join, they can watch some of your content. I think it's important for people to have a platform that they enjoy and that they can learn on, because yeah, sure, you might like YouTube. Yeah, you might like TikTok. Yeah, you might like, what's another platform people use? Threads
Instagram.
Or something.
Like
Instagram, Facebook, yes, all of these social medias that, daunting to me. I'm like, whoa, so much. But people have their preference, and so this is why we throw down those links, so you can go where you feel most comfortable. Reach out to Shira, because it's so important for you to understand your perception even more in our world today, because everyone's going to tell you who to be, what to be. Who do you want to be? And it's so important to find out sooner than later. So I do want to thank you so much for coming on, spending some time talking about your work, and you're just having a fun conversation today.
Thank you, Michael. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you.